Is South Africa and China finally dumping the dollar?
So Standard Bank has just joined CIPS. Now you're probably wondering, what is CIPS? Well, CIPS stands for Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. Now this is a way for countries to buy things and pay for those things from China without ever including the dollar. Now why is that important? Well, almost every transaction that happens in the world always includes the dollar. About 89% of every transaction happening everywhere between two countries always includes the dollar. Now that's because the dollar is a trade and a reserve currency. So what does that mean? What is a reserve currency? Well, today we're going to be talking about that. Now this video will be slightly longer than the others. My videos are usually 4 to 6 minutes, but this one I realized that many people have been asking for this, so I need to give you all the information that you need so that whenever someone brings up the dollar, you will understand the importance of that and why people are angry about the dollar, and also why it's very difficult for them to leave the dollar. So let's start with a reserve currency. What is a reserve currency? A reserve currency is a currency in which countries choose. This is a choice, by the way. Countries choose to keep a large amount of that currency to use it to trade. So it's like a way to store your value. So if you're a country and you know that at some point you're going to buy things, you want to stockpile some money so that when you do need to buy those things, you will always save money. So countries always choose a certain currency from a certain country. Now the reserve currency wasn't always the dollar. If we go back enough to the 1600s, it was the Spanish pieces of 8. That was the reserve currency. Now after that, it was the British pound. Many people from South Africa or from Africa will remember this era because we have 2 rand, which was equal to 1 pound. That's why 2 rand is called bondo, pound. That was because at that time, the pound was the reserve currency. Everybody wanted to keep some pounds in their country so that they can use it whenever they want to buy something from another country. But this went all up until World War II. The pound started to lose its power just around World War I and then in World War II. So the fighting and the wars that were going on in Europe started to move the power away from Britain to the United States. And we're going to get to the reasons why that happened. But yeah, just going back and understanding that at some point, 2 rands was equal to a pound. And if you look now, 1 pound is equal to like 23 rands. So that's how much the value of the rand has fallen. But let's get back to the reserve currency. So if you look at why the currencies of these countries were chosen to be reserve currencies, there are certain characteristics that come with that. First of all, a country needs to have a large, vibrant, and safe economy. Second of all, it needs to have a very strong financial system. So people need to know where the money is going, where is it coming from. So the financial system of that country needs to be very strong. Thirdly, the country needs to have a very strong military, which will be able to defend that currency that everybody is storing their money in. If you look at the British, for a very long time, they had the best military in the world. They had the best navy in the world.
For 200 years, Britain was the most powerful nation in the world. From Canada to India, from Australia to Nigeria, from the Caribbean to South Africa, the British Empire once ruled over 1/3 of the people on Earth.
That's why they were able to conquer everybody all across the world. They have so many ships, so attacking them was almost impossible. And remember, they are an island, so they were always protected from all of the wars that were happening in Europe. That's why the British pound became a reserve currency, because everybody was saying, we are always fighting over here. I'm going to store my money over there in Great Britain's currency, because that currency is not going to collapse. Nobody's just going to go there and take over. So that's one of the biggest factor which makes a currency to be chosen to be a reserve currency, because everybody wants their money to be safe, and you need to choose a country that looks like it can defend itself. So for a very long time, that country was Great Britain, for a very long time. And this gave Great Britain a lot of power and a lot of influence. That's why they were also able to fund their exploitation of Africa, of Asia, and so on and so forth. But this came to an end when World War I and World War II happened. Now, it didn't happen during World War I, because during World War I, there were no airplanes that were flying the same way that they were in World War II. Now, in World War II, the painter from Austria, Mr. Mustache, developed planes that were now able to fly from Europe, come back and kaboom, kaboom, kaboom here in Britain, and then fly back. This meant that Britain was no longer as secure as it used to be. Its ships and its navy were useless now because the war was happening in the skies. So they lost that status of having a reserve currency because people no longer trusted that they could protect their money and their value. And after World War II, Europe was devastated, including the United Kingdom, including Britain. It was devastated. It was wasn't as destroyed as the rest of Europe, but it was devastated. And also, China was devastated. All of Asia was devastated. Japan was devastated. The USSR was devastated. So everybody was devastated except for one country. And that country was the United States of America. They had not been touched at all. Not even a single bullet was fired in the United States. So they were not touched by World War II. So this meant that their economy was functioning, their banking system was functioning, their finances were functioning, and also their military was functioning. Remember that they dropped those 2 bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. So by the end of World War II, the United States was the strongest military in the world, even though the USSR started to catch up and then they kind of became level. But at the time, the one country that looked like it couldn't be touched was the United States. So what happened was that many countries moved their gold to the United States. Physical gold got into ships and it was sent to the United States because everybody wanted to keep their money and their wealth and their value very safe. And the one country that could provide that was the United States. So in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement was signed. This was 44 countries that came in and said, we need to choose one currency and that currency will be the reserve currency of the entire world and we're gonna set exchange rates. So this happened and all those countries agreed, and from that point onwards, the United States was the accepted reserve currency. So what are the benefits of having a reserve currency? A reserve currency is very important. If it wasn't important, people would have dumped the dollar a long time ago, because trust me, the United States misbehaves when it comes to the dollar, but people can't dump it because they need some sort of reserve currency. So let's look at it practically, right? Now, countries produce different things. If you're Saudi Arabia, you have oil. If you're South Africa, you have gold. If you're China, you have some products. If you're Brazil, you have soybeans, and so on and so forth. How do we decide how much soybeans go for how much gold? How do we decide how much gold goes for oil? How do we decide if you want to exchange now oil to get 13 cows from Congo and then you also want to get soybeans? So this becomes very difficult to use commodities to exchange those things. We need to find one thing that we can use. Now, for thousands of years, those things were minerals like gold, copper, and silver. So we will know that this amount of gold can buy me a cow, but this amount of gold can buy me 10 sheep. And then this amount of gold can buy me this amount of wheat or this amount of maize meal. So you need to have something that you can interchange that thing's value for everything else. Now, this went on up until 1971. The reserve currency, including the dollar, were always tied to gold. They were gold backed up until 1971. Now, what happened in 1971? Inflation hit the United States and the value of the dollar started to drop. When other countries saw that that was happening, they said, we need our gold back. We're going to give you back your dollar. Can you please bring back your gold, our gold? We're going to give you your worthless dollar, because the value of the dollar was dropping, right? The United States realized that it was running out of gold reserves and it was going to have nothing by the end. So President Nixon came out with his famous speech. Some of you might have seen it, where he said, we're going to cut the value of the dollar from being backed by gold.
The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
When he said it, it was as if it was going to be temporary, but everybody knew that it wasn't going to be temporary. And the United States started saying no to countries that wanted their gold back. And what are you going to do? They are the strongest military. Are you going to go there and take it by force? No, you are not. So the United States cut the link between the dollar and gold. We got what we call now fiat currency, which is a currency that is not backed by any commodity or by gold. So from this point onwards, it meant that the value of the dollar was going to be based on how well the economy of the United States was doing. Because if the economy is doing bad, then everybody's reserve currency that they have in dollars are going to lose value. If it was doing good, then the value of that was going to go up. So the nice thing was that for most of the time, the United States economy was always doing very well. So people didn't feel the need to exchange dollars for anything else, because you can see that your dollars are increasing in value, whereas other things are dropping in value. value. So more and more countries got to start saving their reserves in dollars. Now came the petrodollar deal. Now this changed everything. So what happened here was that the United States went to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia needed weapons to defend itself and things like that. So the United States said, we will provide you those weapons to defend yourself, but we want you to agree that every oil barrel will be bought using a dollar, and you're not going to accept anything because we are not going to take anything from you other than dollars. So if you want to buy weapons, you want to buy technology and all of that, we'll only accept dollars. So anyone who's coming to you to buy oil, they better buy it with dollar. What this did is that it increased the demand of the dollar, which also increased the value of the dollar, which made it more attractive for people to say, we better keep our reserves in dollars because look, they're increasing in value. So more and more countries joined and keeping more and more dollars as their reserve currency. Now this created a positive feedback loop, which meant that because more and more people are using dollars, you can't be the only one left out. You are forced to also join, to also trade with dollars and have your reserves in dollars. Now let's talk about the problem of having the dollar as the reserve currency. The biggest problem was that this gave the United States a large amount of power. This meant that the United States can just print more dollars, which means that they are reducing the value of your reserves, whereas they can use that to fund their companies, fund their wars, and so on and so forth. That's why the United States is in debt. It just gives itself debt by printing more and more and more dollars, whereas it exchanges those dollars for products, for gold, for things coming from China. They give you paper, you give them material. So that is the biggest weakness. And also, the United States started using those to sanction countries. If you remember what happened to Zimbabwe, it was cut off from doing any trade using the dollar. And that meant that everybody else wanted dollars from Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe didn't have those dollars, which means that the economy plummeted. The same thing with Cuba, with the trade embargo. They said that if anybody's going to trade with Cuba, we're going to punish you. You will no longer have access to the dollar. So this gave the United States a lot of power. But this power started to play against them because many more countries started to be added to the list of countries that are sanctioned. Countries like Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Zimbabwe, and so on and so forth. The more countries were being sanctioned, the more many countries started to realize that no, man, we can't allow one country to do this to us. We can't allow them to have so much power. So people started to talk about alternatives, including the BRICS currency. You probably have heard of that, and also other alternatives like the euro. So the European Union came out together and said, amongst ourselves, let's find some way that we can trade within each other, and then took the euro and made it global. So there are other alternatives. You don't always necessarily need to use the dollar, but at this point, the dollar is king. So why is it that we can't escape it? Why doesn't China just wake up tomorrow and say, let's dump the dollar, we don't need the dollar, and let's use the yuan? It's because China also has a large amount of money reserved in dollars. If they do that, all those savings are going to lose their value. So China doesn't want that to happen overnight. Slowly but surely, yes, but overnight, no. And also, for you to be a reserve currency, you need to open up your books. You need to allow people to see what you're doing. You need to communicate your policies. You need an independent central bank, and China doesn't play like that. Because in China, the politicians control the central bank. The direction that the central bank takes is dictated by the politicians. But if you want your currency to be the reserve currency, you can't have that. And also, China doesn't want the value of the RMB to go up too quickly, because that will mean that their products that they're producing will be less competitive. The same way that right now, a phone produced in the United States will cost 3 times the same value that the phone produced in China would. That's because the dollar has more value, which means that the people who are in the United States, they want to be paid more money to make the very same phone, whereas the people in China can be paid less, and then that phone will be cheaper, and all of those products in China will be cheaper, which means that the economy of China can keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. So China is not in a hurry to replace the dollar. And I know that many people think that, yeah, we're just going to ditch the dollar. China doesn't want that to happen immediately. Slowly, yes, but not immediately. Same with India. India literally came out and said, we are not not trying to replace the dollar. That's not our intention. But many countries are becoming more and more angry at what the United States uses the dollar to do, to punish everybody, to sanction everybody, to close out everybody. So I think that over time, people are going to start to think about alternatives, and they're going to become serious on taking on those alternatives. So what is the significance of Standard Bank joining CIPS? It means that now South Africans, when they want to purchase things in China, their money won't be converted first to the dollar, in which the United States get a little bit of a share, and then converted from the dollar to the renminbi, in which the dollar gets a share again, and then the renminbi gets a little bit as well. So there will be a little bit less cost when it comes to buying things from China if you're using Standard Bank. I have a feeling that other banks are going to follow suit, because this gives Standard Bank an advantage and a competitive edge, because a lot of people are buying things from China. So there you go. I just wanted to give you that information. If this is the first time you're coming across my channel, please go and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Go and watch my other videos there. I'm trying to get more and more watch hours so that maybe at some point I can get monetized, and then I will have more time to spend giving you nice videos like this, which are well researched, because currently I have a 9 to 5, so I have to balance the two. So please go there, subscribe, watch some of my videos over there, and let's engage in the comment section, and I'm gonna see you there.